Om Sahanao Vatu Sahanao Punaktu Sahaviryam Kalavavahi Tejasvinavaditam Astu Madhitvishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May our study be cooperative. May it be illumined and give us strength and enthusiasm. May we not unnecessarily quarrel with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So as usual, I'll pause and see if there is some question, or not even pause. If there's a question, we can put it straight away. I have one question from one participant. Here we have one participant. And that is, can we cover the basics of Vedanta in the sense that if somebody were to ask us, what is Vedanta? We can give a simple, straightforward answer that won't be confusing. So we'll hold that in reserve and see if there are any other questions that can come up for us.
The principles of the Vedanta, you said, nature is eternal, no beginning and no end. But in the Gita, it says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the beginning and I am the end. And then in the principles of Vedanta, it says no beginning. So if you're covering that, maybe you clarify also. Okay.
About, first of all, I want to answer the question about beginning and end. Any question that we ask, we have to take into consideration relativity of perception. Things do not look the same from all directions. So we can see this if we, the example I often use is a traffic accident, and you ask people what happened, and somebody will say the car jumped out, or you know, there'll be maybe 6 different reports. But it depends on where we are standing. And so the typical example I give is, does a rainbow exist or does it not exist? Does it have a beginning? Does it have an end? And is there a time span over which we can see it? But then you have to seek more clarity from the questioner. From what angle are you looking at this? If you are looking at it from a suitable angle where the sun is shining and water droplets are there, and they are refracting light like a lens, then from the viewer's point of view, at that certain angle, yes, a rainbow exists. But when you change the angle, when you alter it, when you go above the clouds, not only does the rainbow cease to exist, but there is no weather actually. Everything is blue sky, sunshine. Only below the level of the clouds will you find the effect of the clouds in the form of weather. So there will be more than one answer to a question. Assuming then that this world has a beginning and end, in what sense? In a cyclical sense, not in a linear sense. But in a spiritual sense, that entity that is viewed as the beginning is also the end. That means, therefore, and also we find similar passages, by the way, in Christian literature, reading such texts as Phenomena of Man, etc., from the Jesuit priest, former Jesuit priest, because he's now deceased. That is a paleontologist called Pierre de Chardin. And he also uses these expressions, Alpha and Omega, I'm the beginning, I'm the end. But it's not that. Actually, if you read it carefully, I'm the beginning, the middle, and the end. And this is also reflected in the Upanishads. What is that which is the beginning, which is the, where do we come from? Where are we going to? And what's in between? Now, the modern idea of evolution is there's a line. You start off in the beginning and you go straight from there. And there's no question of, is there an end? From the bioevolutionist point of view, it just goes on forever. And it goes on in a haphazard direction. In fact, there's no direction. And no direction, no purpose, and no origin. And since nobody witnessed the origin, we leave it off. But there is this question of abiogenesis, which is still there as a question mark. How did things come about? How did we come from just a crystalline substance like a rock? a bunch of chemicals held together to what we are now. Of course, people may assume that we are rock-like, depending on your intellectual capacity, but generally speaking, we have arrived at man with the capacity to change things, the capacity to determine our own freedom, and the capacity to make decisions. And you may say, within a limited scope, we would agree, yes. So it's not total freedom, it's limited freedom. And that freedom is expressed in a causal relationship. So there's a sequence of events. How did the sequence of events begin? Well, you acknowledge there's a beginning. You can call that alpha if you like. And what begins will have to have a lifespan and an end. But you see, we wouldn't view things in a linear way. We think of things in a cyclical way because we don't find any evidence of linear movement in this world, only temporary movement. When we look at this world, it's a world of transformational causation. That is, a name and a form is transformed into something else, but the whole thing continues. Was there any moment where there was no life? No, there was some entity that originated what we have here. It'll go back into its state of potentiality and it'll come forth again. Because that's what we experience throughout the whole of nature. So you might say that the original tree under which Buddha sat and got his illumination, we don't find it anymore. No, but we find its children. We find various branches from it. We find its relatives everywhere. And so, in a sense, that tree of Buddha continues. It never ends. Now, when we say that nature never ends, is because we're viewing this law of causality and we're witnessing it everywhere. So that it is birth, life, death, birth, life, death, birth, life, death. It continues. But the origin of all of that, of the whole thing, what is that? So that has to be considered. And theology represents our philosophical understanding of it. So in the Bible we have in the beginning, that's how it starts, in the beginning. But it's in the beginning from our point of view. How did nature begin? It is not necessarily in an eternal sense, in a temporary sense. And so the things that change will naturally have a beginning, a middle, and an end. All three will be there. These beginnings and ends are called fields. The term field is a very descriptive term and is being picked up by modern science as well, because at the very basic level is not an atom, is not a subatomic particle. The bottom layer of this whole existence is what we call a quantum field, an area, if you like, of operation, amorphous in its description, with excitations happening within us that we interpret and call in our language, to get some concept of it, particles. But actually, it's really oscillations or excitations in a quantum field, a bubbling thing of existence and non-existence together. Things arrive seemingly from nowhere and then disappear into that same area of potentiality. So the ancient sages knew this already. They understood this area of potentiality, and they called this area of potentiality Agasha. Agasha, kind of unmanifest area, hardly any movement taking place, but some movement is there. A tiny, tiny field of excitation is there. And when things change, when things get a little faster, in other words, when energy impacts on it, then it becomes combined in a different way. Now, this is very perplexing to modern science, but it was not perplexing to these ancient sages, these rishis. They understood this well. So they had a very clear concept of what this world is. This world is matter. We call it akasha. And so that we can grasp the point, we can also call it food. And if you have food, then there must be an eater of the food, a consumer, but that's not the end of it. So you might say that the beginning of today was breakfast. And breakfast helped you sustain a certain life. But that energy that you get from it will soon be exhausted unless it's replenished. So we're witnessing all the time this reincarnation of birth, life, and death. If you study physiology, anatomy, you'll understand that every cell has its birth, life, and death. Within 7 years, there's a complete overhaul. You get a brand new model. I know it doesn't look like that. I know there are cracks on your face and gray hairs appearing and this and that and the other. But nature has this way of renewing all the time, not ceasing. So there is no example of death that you can find ever in the universe. You can only find transformations. That is because the nature of matter is a changing of its shape and form. And that means it's something like we can represent it as a kind of ocean. What is the beginning of the wave system? We can call that a kind of beginning. And what is the end of the wave system? When is the ocean calm? You can call that an end. But nobody has any confusion about this at depth. At depth, the ocean remains vast, unchanging, and seemingly homogeneous in all directions. So this is a good example that we can use for oneness and many, both. Because when we shift our perspective in the one hand, we get one answer. Shift it on the other hand, another answer. Is not a contradiction in terms. It is just to do with this law of the relativity of perception. That's all that's there. But when we use these terms of field, quantum field and so on, we are using very ancient concepts. In the 13th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, we have this concept mentioned about a field. And the most useful statement that Krishna makes, Kshatrajna, I should say, Kshatrajnam Chapi Mam Vidhi Sarakshesho Bharata Kshetra Kshetratnyayor Jnanam Yat Daj Jnanam Vatam Mama. You know me to be the knower of all the fields. The only oneness. Only one knower, but many, many fields. Knowledge of the field and the knower of the fields is really true knowledge. Now you have a definition of Vedanta. Vedanta, whose origin is from vid to know to see, anta, the finality of it. That is the end of truth. That is, there's an absolute truth underlying which all people have to subscribe to because it's true. You can't have anything other than it's either true or it's false. So truth is something that is unchanging. That's the characteristic of it. As soon as we see a change in it, we have to introduce the law of relativity of perception. So before we make any statement about anything, we have to adopt a certain position. And from that position, we can view things and make some general statements about something. But when we shift our viewpoint, we can see things differently and accept all positions as true. Now, when somebody asks me, as they did on one occasion, we were taking a group of people up to Dungannon, and we always stop at Armagh Cathedral. Armagh is the seat of the whole island, the Catholic Church. And seeing the orange robes of us monks, there was myself and one other, I think it was Swami Purnananda or somebody anyway. And so some curious person asked me, "What religion are you?" And I said, "I'm Catholic." So that pleased and puzzled her. Because she was Catholic, and she expected me to say Hare Krishna, of course, because she thought, dressed like this, I'm part of the ISKCON. You see, the word Catholic means universal. And then I followed it up with saying, actually, I'm more Catholic than the Catholic because I'm universal. I believe all religions are true. All standpoints are true. Because wherever you are in the ocean, it's true. Of course, the waves may vary, but that's just because of your relativity of perception. So we have to try and formulate an answer that is succinct enough to stop people in their tracks a little bit, to satisfy their curiosity, but at the same time to make a point. And the point is very relevant in this day and age because the reason why we're all fighting, the reason why there's turmoil and disturbance in the world, you simply look at any news channel and you'll find it, is because we are estranged from a sense of oneness. And as soon as we start seeing fragmented things and put ourselves in a fragmented category, then there's an opportunity for defending it, and war ensues. There's a typical drawing I normally give, at the risk of repetition endlessly. You see, this is how we view this world, as a boundary, a limited boundary. Bhagavad Gita, Krishna calls this field. And because it's a field, like any other agricultural field, what we sow, we reap. Or what we reap, we sow. Whatever we put in, we get out. And so the first boundary that we see is this world, and we call this world. But the problem is with a circle, when you ask where's the alpha and omega, where's the beginning and the end, you can't find it. Swami Vivekananda puts this out as a circle with A, B, A, B, A, B, infinitely put around it. You can't see which is the A and which is the B. So we can only use a convenience term, but this whole thing has an origin. And this whole thing has a dissolution. And this whole thing has a lifespan like any bubble. So we live in a kind of bubble, a kind of sphere, and we have boundaries. This boundaries is visual, is perceptual. It's bounded by eyes and ears, and touch and taste and so on, and bounded by the senses. And another boundary within that is put. This is this. Of course, he's been on a diet a little bit. So this we call I. We make this is our first mistake. Second mistake, actually. This is our first mistake. This is our second mistake. But this is really the primary mistake in connection with this boundary here. And opposed to this, another bounded area with like things, entities like this. So this we call I and me, and we assume we have something called a mind. We call that C, mind. We call this B, that's dominated by B, body. But opposite to that, we have other people, other places, other events. And the boundary itself and everything going on here is bounded by factors, time. Time is a registration of change. Space. Space is a way of understanding what objects are. But the problem with the space is this. We see ourselves as separate. Now, where's the unity on all this? No, unity is there. So the best we can do is, we can try and defend this. This is most people's position. Let's defend this. And we have three options. We can fight against it, or we can withdraw against it, or we can simply stand mesmerized where everything becomes equal and nothing happens. So this is one position of a relativity of perception that is bounded by the field of the senses. We can call this the field of the senses, otherwise also called the waking state. But that's not the only state of consciousness we have. We understand it shifts now because another state is available to us. And the same criteria for that is there. Time and space. We'll add another factor, causation. When you introduce causation, then you have a beginning and you have an end. So there's a field. But what does Krishna say? I am the knower in all the fields. Where's the knower standing? I'm the knower here. Not only this field, but all the fields. And this knowledge is true knowledge. When we limit this knowledge to here, it's not true in the sense that our knowledge will come and go because the world itself comes and goes. When we stand here as the knower, now Krishna is standing here as the knower. And whenever Krishna says I and declares some kind of divine statement, just as Jesus does or Buddha does, he's not standing here, he's standing here. The position of the knower. So what is the Vedanta? The Vedanta is the finality of truth that creates a unity everywhere and is Catholic enough to agree with everybody. Now, when somebody asks, what is your religion? And that's the original question that comes from here. People are thinking in this way. They're thinking that you have to be a club member. They're not thinking in this comprehensive way about the field and the knower. And the things that we hear are many. The two ears constitute a single principle of hearing. And there are many colors that we see. The eyes constitute one principle. Skin, we can feel many things through the skin. That's another principle. We can determine whether things are smooth or rough, whether things are cold or hot, whether things are pleasant or unpleasant, or whether something is touching me or not. So this whole sense world is a single unit of perception. Standing here, single unit of perception. There are millions of colors. The perceiver sees them relative to the eyeball. But within the scope, there is something that can observe the eyeball. You can see whether the ear is humming one day or clear the next. You can see whether the eyeball is scratchy one day or whether it is watery or whether it is clear the next. All of these things are available to us because that's a field and objects are there against it. And what is the observer of this? A single unit is there. You can call it mind. The mind has got different functions. It can be enthusiastic one day, can be depressed the next day. There are various states of the mind can be perceived by some other entity. That and all the things beyond the senses themselves and also their objects, that represents a totality of a field from the point of view of one single unit. And that single unit we call the intellect. But it's got within it an immediate level. The mind and its variations, sense organs, their varied conditions of health or ill health, all the fields covered by the sense organs is all encompassed in that single unit that acts as an observer. But the intellect can be also clear one day, can be confused the other day, can be dull another day. And so what is that acting on the intellect? Some other observer is there. We call this ego, I, a comprehensive sense. Another way of saying, when this knower and this field get confused, when this and this gets confused, we call this ego. It's a useful thing. Without it, we cannot operate or dominate things or control the world. If you want a comprehensive description of what Vedanta is, there's no finer description than what Swami Vivekananda puts out. Because if you say, I believe in unity, a unity of existence, I am a Catholic, more Catholic than the Catholic. For me, all religions, all approaches are true because the fundamental level is the same. You can use your own expression for it. Then if somebody presses you, what more? You'll say, I believe. And here we now can quote Swami Vivekananda. There's no finer overall comprehensive description that each soul is potentially divine. Each soul. Not the Catholics, not the Protestants, not the Jews. There's the old joke, you see, about, and I'm speaking here in Ireland where, of course, majority, 78% are ascribed to the Roman Catholic Church and culturally Roman Catholics. So there's a kind of understanding that heaven is their right. We can't allow anybody, not even fellow Christians. One Methodist goes to heaven, and St. Peter greets him as traditionally should be the case at the pearly gates. So our stories tell us, and guides him past a vast wall with big signs everywhere, silence, silence. And the man starts asking, and Peter says, shh, shh, shh. You have to lower your voice a little bit. What's behind that wall? He says, we have to tiptoe past this wall because that's behind that wall are the Roman Catholics. They think they're the only ones up here. So that's the exclusivist kind of feeling that everybody has. If they're putting themselves in this position, even religion is in this position, then I still have to fight against other people here. Christians are here, Muslims are here, say. All theists are here and atheists are here, something like that. It's all to do with preserving this field. But it is a field. And with any field, activity occurs. And a field has a crop of things that we gather. And interesting enough, Jesus also uses an example, but he puts it as a vineyard. That's the only difference. But a vineyard is still in a field. When somebody asks you, what do you do? What is your field? It means, what is your scope? So our scope is this world here, bounded. Then we can ask then, this field of the mind and the field of the senses and the field of the world, the objects in front, the field of the ego itself, the field of the sense organs and the actual sense perceived world, relatively of perception has to be employed. But the ego itself is a thing that is also perceived. And the same ego is not perceived in the dream. In the dream, multiple egos are there. You dream you're a king with a queen in a palace and live for 1,000 years. Only one ego is there playing all the parts. And there's an observer for that also. So when, therefore, we inquire, what is the self? That must be at the back of everything. And in that sense, it's an alpha. And that single unit beyond which we can't be properly adjusted. We can't align to it because it's not an object. All the other things in front are objects in fields, multiple fields, and that they all enter into a unity of fields, so one total field is seen. All these are multiple fields, but when you stand here, one field is there, and there's one knower there also. We can see in the Upanishads that there is, Katha Upanishad, for example, give us a scale of order. And when you retreat one field into the next and go backwards, when we withdraw one field into a more subtle field, more subtle field, more subtle field, or you can view it as a scale of ascending values, then the perceiver, the witness consciousness that's penetrating it all, not just the beginning and the end, but penetrating it also. Otherwise, how does it arise? How does it move? How does it get its operation? So to isolate it from the field is an intellectual gymnastic feat. And one can do that. You can just imagine pure consciousness standing and the whole field of multiplicity, unimportant and vanishing. That you can imagine. You can picture it, and you can see it like a series of fields and then one field, and all philosophical systems fit into this understanding so far. Whether they stress the point or not, they surely cover it. Now, a similar question was asked to me by the local parish priest here when we first met. He said, "So what religion are you?" I said, "We're not a religion, we're a philosophy." Well, that baffles him because you have to be a religion. That's people's thinking. No, the religion is just the expression of it. So the Vedanta philosophy is the underlying ocean of harmony that exists underneath everything, as a substratum to everything. We believe in the substratum of truth that every religion expresses differently, and every person expresses differently, because every person is a wave aspect of that. So coming back to Vivekananda's wonderful statement, each soul is therefore potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this from within. This process is the practical portion of the Vedanta philosophy that we call yoga. Now we have to present this in such a way that even a child will understand. And so we can reduce it to some basics. But you can vary it, of course. So I believe in the universal truth that each soul is potentially divine, and that we're all manifesting this. Whether a child understands that or not, that's a different thing. But the analogy of an ocean is very useful. There is one ocean. Supposing I become extremely huge, something like a giant, something like a figure from Gulliver's Travels. I've used this example before. And I stand in the sea, in the ocean, but the water only comes just above my ankle. Now, normally, if you ask somebody, how many different continents are there? Well, I think there are, 7 or so. There's the Australia, the Antarctic, there's the Americas, North and South, there's Europe, there's the Africa, and so on. The problem is that if you are a huge giant and you stand in the ocean and the water only comes up just beyond your ankle and ask the same question, the person will say, "What continents?" Wriggle my toes in the mud. There's an earth below me, a foundation there. But whatever hill I see in the distance, I understand to be the same land. Only small things. I'll only see them as little sand pits, if you like, or little aberrations, or little, hillocks in the whole thing. And those hills themselves only come up just beyond my ankle, not even to the knee. So now I can answer you, there's only one land, and water happens to be in it, of course. So there's only one thing, there's only one entity. Now, what is the practical use of such a thing? If there is only one entity, and if your nature is this divinity, then whatever you do, you're doing to yourself, for better or worse. And if you have this sense of unity, this holistic sense, not just the scope of this small world, but the entire universe now, the whole of existence, and you understand truly and really feel this unity of existence, then where does your fighting start and where does it finish? What is the scope of making war or hating anybody? Where is the judgment on another? And this is the basis for loving your neighbor as yourself. The golden rule applies in every religion, but the logic may not be well understood. So behind everything is spirit, and everything is spirit. And what is this nature of this spirit? Is it really bound? We feel that we are bound. And if its nature is to be bound, then any amount of effort, any amount of spiritual discipline, yoga, meditation will have no effect. If its nature is bound, it'll have no effect. On the other hand, if its nature is free, then how do you account for the felt bondage? The necessity to get rid of pain. How do you manage that? How do you find this if it is perfect in itself, not dependent upon the ego, the intellect, the mind, the senses, the objects? All of them can vanish in a dreamless sleep, of course. The whole thing can go. If you ask the question about death, you say, well, you have a dress rehearsal for it every night. Every night we vacate our current position here and we go into an adventurous thing called a dream, a nebulous thing, and then we enter into a condition where there is no conditionality. There's no time, no space, no causation. None of that is there. No difference is there. Therefore, no body to fight with, and therefore the condition is peace. We only find a peace, but it's still objective. We can still observe it. So nothing is really lost and nothing is really binding. It's like water off a duck's back, all these experienced fields of multiplicity, starting from the ego to the intellect, to the mind, to the sense organs, to the objects. All of these fields that are represented, they can be detached, and yet the spirit remains the spirit. That is Vedanta, to show you that there's only one thing, one spirit is there. We only believe in one spirit. If you ask, how will a child express it? We believe in one principle, and there's nothing else there. Of course, a child may not understand that. So why does an experience like that come? We can't answer it. The only answer that we can give is, it doesn't stay binding all the time. And if you take adequate steps to access this essential freedom, then you will discover and find out this unity of existence. Nothing will be compromised. You'll reveal itself in the full glory of what it is. And spiritual practices, for this reason, are given in various systems. And I think it's impolite to ask, what is your system? Your system is up to you. So the next question that the parish priest asks, having gotten the answer, what religion are you? I said, no, we're a philosophy. The next question, but you believe in God. What kind of God do you believe in? And my answer to that is, that's very private and personal. Your polite way of saying is none of your business. Then I explained to him, I said, you see, what this knower is, what this ultimate supreme principle is, we all agree on one thing. It is unknown and unknowable by normal means. You can't see it, you can't lick it, you can't taste it. This entity, in its pristine glory, is not an object of our scrutiny. It doesn't change with time. It doesn't evolve. And it has no parts. If it has parts, we'd have to look for another principle, because anything with parts will perish. This is the imperishable. And so how do we bring it within our scope? We do it according to our culture, according to our limited understanding, according to our sincerity also, mobilizing all the forces that we have of love and compassion, mobilizing all the noble values that we can muster, so that in the Raja Yoga and the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, how do we get rid of all these aberrations? By cultivating counter thoughts, counter feelings. In other words, where selfishness comes in, we counter it with selflessness. Instead of thinking, I'll hate my neighbor's nose, or I'll do this, or I'll do that, we bring in values of strength and wisdom and truth and beauty and goodness and love and harmony, until the mind is saturated with these things. And then the mind is in a condition, like a crystal, is clear enough. That mind has the clarity. All the fields are now calm. No waves in the field anymore. And then we clearly understand this position of this knower. And so this Ishvara, the supreme entity brought within our scope of relationships, is in the yoga system only a teacher of teachers, unaffected by time, not exactly a god. That we can take as well. The yoga system took this understanding that each personality has got a spirit. Nature is one single unit. But they didn't take on the generosity enough to make sure that that one spirit, that separate spirit is only one also. Vedanta corrects it and says, our experience tells us only one. When we get to that, and you yourselves will understand it, because in Patanjali Yoga Sutras, that based on the Sankhya system, the last chapter is on independence. Kaivalya is an assumption that we can isolate from this and stand full and free already, where there is no division whatsoever. We can't see where my spirit ends and your spirit begins. It's impossible to find a survey line or a fence between this. Even the mind, it's impossible to find any line. Even in energy, it's difficult to assess this line because there's only one energy. If we come to the Raja Yoga, in the very first chapter, for example, Patanjali Yoga Sutras, I should say, Raja Yoga is a commentary on this. There's a beautiful passage, the first chapter there, concentration, and the 34th sutra is there. That tells us that throwing out and restraining the breath, it's about that, but the commentary is wonderful. I can read you the commentary because it's revealing with regard to the oneness of energy. Anyway, the word used is prana, says Swami Vivekananda in his commentary. And prana is not exactly breath. You often go to yoga classes, physical yoga classes, and learn yoga is breath. Let's breathe in some extra prana. You can't do it. It's not a substance like that. It's the thing that makes the lungs move. And what makes the lungs move? Naturally, by controlling what makes the lungs move, you're also controlling the direction of the energy that is expressed through breath and its restraint and control. It's the same, it's the name for energy that is in the universe, he says. Whatever you see in the universe, whatever moves or works or has life, is a manifestation of this prana. The sum total of the energy displayed in the universe is called prana. And this prana, before a cycle begins. If something begins, there's an ending to it. So what is the beginning? The beginning is a mobilization of energy, cosmic energy. So the prana before a cycle begins, the idea is that everything is going in a cycle. Birth, life, death, here is a cycle. And if the law of nature is constant, then the whole universe goes through a cycle. So it's a cyclical model of cosmology. That's very different from the standard model of cosmology today that assumes there's a beginning and then it has a problem. Because the question is also asked, what is before the beginning, called a singularity? And your response will be, it's a nonsensical question. That is the beginning. There's nothing before a beginning. So you have three options available to you. You have nothing making something out of nothing. The modern cosmology model called Big Bang. Second option is you have something making something out of nothing. This is a kind of creation understanding that creates all kinds of problems for us because ex nihilo, you can never make something out of nothing. So we can dispatch these two into the area of not even a child will accept those things. And then the other option is you make something Something makes something out of something. That's the same something. You can't have two things. So it's the same in every way, including the same with energy. And it remains before the cycle begins in a motionless state. And when the cycle begins, this prana begins to manifest itself. It is this prana, and if you use a poetic understanding, kind of imagination, you can say God's breath. And in Jewish tradition, they have the same concept, that ruach, the spirit breathed over the waters. What a wonderful concept. That's in Judaism. So it's manifested as motion and as this nervous motion in human beings or animals, and the same prana is manifesting as thought and so on. So what is pranayama? Control of thought. Controlling the energy of thought. The whole universe is a combination of this prana and akasha. That means this energy and matter. And so is the human body. Out of akasha, you get the different materials that you feel and see. And out of prana, all the various forces. Now this throwing out and restraining the prana is what is called pranayama. And Patanjali, the father of the yoga philosophy, doesn't give very many particular directions. It goes on like that. Where we go on, some of this, he says, he's told before in previous chapters. But first, he says, you must remember that this prana is not the breath, but that which causes the motion of the breath. That which is the vitality of the breath is the prana. And again, the word prana is used for all the senses. They're all called pranas. So we have just gone through multiple fields. What are these multiple fields? Energy, nothing more. Therein we find a material unity. Now this is going way back, long before Einstein put energy equivalent to matter. The E equals M. All we have in this universe, this whole field that is here, boundaries and all, is just only one thing, energy. And so we see, he says that prana is force, and yet we cannot call it force because force is only a manifestation of it. It is that which manifests itself as force, and everything else in the way of motion. Then he says, now these later yogis considered that there are, and he goes on like that to describe in more detail this pranayama. But the interesting thing is this. He says, we must remember the definition of this world of ours. It is only the infinite existence projected into the plane of consciousness. We can call this knower the infinite existence. It is not something that is the object of knowing. It is a knower. It is a seer. It is an absolute entity. And so it is only the infinite infinite existence projected into the plane of consciousness. A little of the infinite is projected into consciousness, and that we call our world. So there is an infinite beyond it. And religion has to deal with both. With a little lump we call our world, and with the infinite beyond. And any religion, he says, which deals with only one of these two will be defective. It must deal with both. And the part of religion which deals with the part of the infinite which has come into the plane of consciousness got itself caught, as it were, because it's free, as it were, you have to introduce this term, in the plane of consciousness, in the cage of time, space, and causation. This is quite familiar to us because we are in that already, and ideas about this world have been with us almost from time immemorial. The part of religion which deals with the infinite beyond comes entirely new to us, and getting ideas about it produces also new channels in the brain, what is called neuroplasticity. And of course, it disturbs the whole system. And that is why we find that the practice of yoga and ordinary people are at first turned out of their grooves. That's why we call this tapasya, because we're creating friction. Any change will create friction. We don't like change. And so this friction initially is there. It goes against our grain, our biological grain. And in the brain itself creates, as it were, new grooves for us. So in order to lessen these disturbances, we have all these various methods, not only devised in the science of religion, but also in all religions. If we take it seriously and don't deal just on the superficial level with, you believe in this, you believe in that, here's the doctrine, here's the dogma, here's the heresy, here's the non-heresy, and all the rest of it. I had a very interesting conversation once that there were some nuns from Portlish who came to see me, and they wanted to know, can we start some interfaith activity in Portlish? Portlish is about maybe an hour or so away from Dublin. Yeah, it's a 2-day walk if you run. So they sat and they were inquiring, what is this karma, you see? And trying to reconcile, trying to match their doctrinal positions. So I said, no, we all have the consequences of sowing and reaping. In all religions you find it. For example, you have hell. Oh, we don't think anybody goes there, they said. I said, all right. You have purgatory. Yes, we're not sure about that either. And limbo, they completely did away with. We can see this shifting thing, shifting scale of values. But this is what is called Yuga Dharma. But we are concerned with Sanatana Dharma, not the Yuga Dharma. An example of Yuga Dharma is if I insist that an integral part of my religion is Sharia law. Sharia law may well have been appropriate in the Middle Ages or the 8th century or 7th century. But can you apply it in these modern times? And so you have to have a constant river that remains the same, but is prepared to change. It's still the same river. And the ancient religions had this capacity to adapt, not to change their substance, their essential nature. But the expression of that, yes, you have to change it. Now, when we talk then of this Yuga system, the system of ages, cyclical model of cosmology, then within that, we have what is called Kalpa. And within that, Yugas. We are currently supposed to be in the Kali Yuga, which began 3102 BC on Krishna's demise. And we have many more to go, many more years to go. So, I mean, millions and millions and billions of years. Before that time, probably the sun would have shriveled up and gone. But you see, the idea is that each successive age diminishes in its purity, gets more polluted. And that means that for each age, a different system has to be there. Now today, there's a great emphasis on materialism and material life. And if you ask me, why does religion diminish in developed countries, Europe, America, etc.? It is because entertainment has increased. Some diversion has been introduced, not just one, but multiple choice diversions have been there. So that people go along the road and doing what I call thumb exercises, not watching where they're going, diverting their attention in different ways. So this really is a misuse of technology. A good use of technology is to increase our efficiency and therefore our concentration. So with all this diversion, materialism naturally is at the fore and the spiritual values are down below. And the human rights that are given have been orientated around the physical. So that people use this phrase, "This is my body, I can do what I like with it." Who said it's your body? You have no business with it. It's a free car given to you. You didn't have to pay any lease on it or monthly payments. Not in that sense. Of course, the payment for the body is disease and illness. The famous phrase from Sri Ramakrishna, this is the rent we have to pay for the body. The rent we have to pay for the body is that the body is a material thing subject to many different influences. And we have to take measures to retain, sustain its health. But as far as ownership is concerned, you look at it properly, despite what you may think. This is not yours, it's not your property. Even just from a material point of view, you can't say it. Because all the energy supplied to it is all through the historical process of the sun's rays coming. It is all solar energy. We are running around on bottled sun energy. That's it. We should at least be thankful for its origin. And so when Krishna says, "I am its origin," you have to take that seriously and understand that it is a statement of immanence. That entity is not just where we came from and where we're going, but is that in between also.